Mike was a jokester. They were young when they got married.
Harmon at one point said, "Oh, you better watch out. You better have eyes at the back of your head."
When they reached the car, Michael Durenleau was attacked by a masked assailant.
There was no theft whatsoever. 2 stabs to the heart, 2 bludgeons to the head.
In fact, Rebecca Durenleau and Harmon Olmsted were involved in this murder.
I think the evidence will show that clearly she was not involved in any way whatsoever.
I've gone through this for over 7 years, and I will still prove my innocence to the day I die.
A brutal murder in the darkened parking lot behind Veronica's Tavern in the sleepy town of Essex Junction, Vermont, stunned the community. As investigators dug deeper, they were faced with an intricate web of circumstantial evidence that would take nearly a decade to unravel. And in the end, the public was left wondering, was justice really served?
Veronica's Tavern is just a small sort of neighborhood kind of pub. You could go in there and play cribbage. You could go in there, play darts. You know, it was just sort of a hometown little corner pub that people would frequent.
At around 9:30 on the evening of July 12, 1985, Michael and Rebecca Durenleau stopped by to celebrate after having gone through a rough patch in their marriage. After a single beer, Michael paid the tab and they left. 5 minutes passed, and then Becky burst back into the tavern.
She initially said, "I need help, I need help. My husband's been hit." People started to head out into the road looking for a pedestrian, and she's like, no, he's over at the other end, and walked them back deep into the lot, 200 feet or more away from Park Street to where the car was in total darkness.
And that's where they found Michael, bleeding from the head and chest. Paramedics arrived and rushed him to a local hospital. Rachel Drown, Michael's sister, still vividly remembers the phone call she got from Rebecca that night.
I could hardly understand her. Finally, you know, I said, "What's going on? Where are you?" And the only thing that came out of her, what she said, was she says, "We're at the hospital, and I don't know if Mike is living or dying." I figured they had been in a car accident. And so I told her I would be right down.
But by the time Rachel arrived at the hospital, doctors told her that Michael was dead, killed by 2 knife wounds to the heart.
None of us slept that night. I knew my brother didn't have any enemies. You're trying to figure out what happened and why it happened.
Rebecca told police that after leaving Veronica's Tavern, she and Michael walked through the dark parking lot to their car. As she unlocked the driver's door, out of the darkness, she saw a man appear behind her husband. Police later determined Michael had been struck hard with a blunt object and stabbed twice in the heart. Rebecca said the only thing she could tell in the darkness was that the attacker appeared to be between 5'3" and 5'6".
No words were exchanged by the assailant. Didn't ask for a wallet, didn't ask for a watch, didn't ask to rob anybody.
There were some other things that didn't add up, like Rebecca's behavior after returning to the bar for help.
She didn't go all the way over next to her husband and didn't seem to have any outward emotion showing while the people tended to her husband.
And why, detectives wondered, had Rebecca chosen to park where she did?
Why did she drive by all those parking spaces? Why did she back in? It was just sort of different kind of behavior that I think raised the antenna for trained investigators to say, there's something here, we're not sure what, but something just doesn't make sense.
Rebecca's behavior raised enough red flags that police started looking into her marriage. She and Michael lived 45 minutes away in Swanton, a small town in Franklin County near the Canadian border.
He married Rebecca, I think it was in 1971.
They were young when they got married. They have started a family. They had 2 children. He was happy. He loved his kids.
At first, Rachel says that Rebecca fit easily into her new extended family.
She got along with everybody. There was no bad vibes going on at that time.
But over the years, the couple grew apart.
Somewhere along the way, things changed. I think maybe the change was going on way before we ever knew it.
That change may have had a lot to do with one man. Police became very interested in Harmon Olmsted.
Harmon Olmsted was a guy from Franklin County who Becky met when he drove a so-called bingo bus, and he was a bus driver, and she started having an affair with him, and Michael found out about it and confronted Harmon, and that's when Harmon at one point supposedly said, "Oh, you better watch out and better have eyes in the back of your head."
Rebecca and Michael lived together here in Swanton at the time, and initially, Michael tried to look the other way.
He tried everything, I think, as he wanted his marriage to work. He loved his kids. He had put a lot of work into his house.
But when the affair continued, Michael moved out of the house and found a lawyer.
When he went to the lawyer, he says, "I want my house and I want my kids." And he says, "I'm going after that."
And that's when Rebecca signaled she wanted to reconcile, and Michael agreed.
And then in July, the 4th of July, we had a family gathering. And that day, he told me that Becky was there at the gathering with the rest of us. They were going to try to get back together.
Their evening out at Veronica's Tavern a week later was supposed to be a celebration of that reunion. Instead, Michael had been attacked and killed by someone whose sole motivation seemed to be in wanting him dead. As the pressure grew on police to make an arrest, Rebecca volunteered to take a lie detector test.
There was some question as to whether she passed it or not. Her lawyer maintained she passed it. There was some question as to whether she had taken some drugs in which to try to circumvent the lie detector test.
A week into the investigation, police announced they had a suspect in the murder of Michael Durenleau. But that was all that they said.
They wouldn't publicly say anything more than that, but the people I talked to and other detectives and other people that were familiar with the case did, in fact, tell me that they thought it was her boyfriend, Harmon Olmsted.
But despite their suspicions, police failed to make any arrests. The days turned into months, and the months into years, as Michael's family started to lose hope that anyone would ever face justice for his murder.
It was hard. We kept hoping that something would come out of it, that we would hear something would happen. It never left your mind. It was hard. I mean, we had family function, and there was always a big void there.
But with only circumstantial evidence pointing to Rebecca's involvement, it was a risky case.
Some state's attorneys want to only take on cases that they're 100% sure that they can win.
But then in 1989, William Sorrell was appointed as the new state attorney in Chittenden County.
There were 2 or 3 cases in particular that were homicide cases that earlier prosecutors wouldn't touch. And he was willing to take them on. And one of those cases was the Durenleau homicide in Essex Junction.
I became state's attorney in February or March of '89, so almost 4 years after the murder of Michael Durenleau.
As he reviewed the case, while there wasn't much physical evidence, the amount of circumstantial evidence pointing towards Becky and Harmon was substantial.
It was clear to me why Harmon Olmsted was the chief suspect almost from the get-go. But secondarily, it's most unusual to have a stranger come out of the darkness and murder someone, no robbery, and just disappear. I mean, either Michael Durenleau was the unluckiest guy alive, or that his wife, Rebecca, was involved in the planning and carrying out the murder of her husband. The question was, did we have enough evidence to prove it?
Sorrell slowly began to build a circumstantial case to present to the grand jury. Rebecca's affair with Harmon Olmsted, Harmon's threats against Michael, the location Rebecca decided to park that night, her strange behavior after her husband was murdered. And there were other pieces to the puzzle, including an eyewitness who had seen a suspicious vehicle near Veronica's Tavern just before the murder.
And it was a large truck, and it had running lights up on the roof. I think it had 7 lights, 5 lights or something, and it was sort of distinctive. Harmon Olmsted owned a Ford roof.
And then there was the German might be involved.
Said these things that I felt that we could introduce.
Man go after the person he believed was the driving force behind Michael's. It was a bold, if risky.
Always hoped that if we could convict Becky, she would have all kinds of incentives to cause is to give up Harmon.
Although he had the power to independently, chose to present his evidence to a
comfortable if average citizens from the community made the charging decision. We'd present the evidence to them, see.
It was a house of cards, but he built.
The foundation was apparently firm enough for the grand jury, and on September 13th, 1991, Mike Donahue wrote the article breaking the news that Rebecca Durenleau had been indicted and charged with accessory to first-degree murder for having helped Harmon Olmsted, who did, with premeditation and malice, kill and murder Michael Durenleau. When we return, Rebecca Durenleau goes on trial for being an accomplice to the murder of her husband, Michael.
I wanted the jury to know from the get-go, this is going to be like essentially building a brick wall.
You'll also hear that he suffered 2 stab wounds to the heart, each stab wound in excess of 6 inches in depth.
I tried to tell them what the bricks were going to look like and then lay them one at a time.
Seven years after Michael Durenleau was killed with a knife through the heart in the darkness behind Veronica's Tavern, his wife Rebecca had been arrested and charged as an accessory to his murder. But with the person suspected of actually killing Michael yet to be arrested and only circumstantial evidence linking Rebecca to the murder, we're about to witness a high-stakes legal showdown that could lead to justice for Michael or set the alleged accomplice to his murder free. On one side was the prosecution, who freely admitted it faced an uphill battle.
The state's case is a wholly circumstantial case. We have no direct evidence from the scene that conclusively links Harmon Olmsted to the scene of the murder.
I wasn't going to be calling some eyewitness who's going to say, I saw Harmon Olmsted kill Michael Durenleau, and Becky saying, yeah, do it while it's happening. It wasn't going to happen. We didn't have that kind of evidence.
But I think when the jury hears about the affair, hears about the fights that Harmon Olmsted and Michael Durenleau had, I think when the jury hears all those little pieces of the puzzle, they're going to have a view, and what I hope will be a compelling view, that, in fact, Rebecca Durenleau and Harmon Olmsted were involved in this murder. There might well have been others, but we don't have to prove how many others there were, just that those 2 were involved, they planned it, and they participated in it.
And on the other side was the defense, who expressed horror that their client had even been charged.
But I think the evidence will show that clearly that she was not involved in any way whatsoever, that this is a situation that the evidence will show that it just accumulated innuendo because she had an affair. I was in the situation of absolutely believing my client was innocent, having a case that was very, very weak in evidence. The state's case is really to the effect that she had an affair and that there's evidence of motive, but there's a long difference between having motive and participating in a homicide, and I think the evidence will clearly show that she didn't. She was being charged for a accessory before the fact for murder when the state didn't have the guts or the information to charge the murderer. And it was obviously being done because they wanted to try to get the Harmon and put pressure on her to turn state's evidence, which she couldn't do.
Rebecca Durenleau's trial for helping to murder her husband began on August 25th, 1992.
There was a lot of interest in this case. Number one, because there aren't that many homicides in Vermont. Number two, Essex is a very peaceful kind of community, a lot of anticipation, and the trial was front page news.
You're going to hear that during the summer of 1984, that all of a sudden, Michael Durenleau's family life turned upside down because his wife, Rebecca, began to have an affair.
I used my opening remarks to the jury to create a roadmap of what they were going to hear with the evidence that we were going to present.
We hear that Rebecca Durenleau filed a divorce action against him.
Again, back to that analogy of building a brick wall, I tried from the get-go to tell them what the bricks were going to look like.
You're going to hear evidence about contacts between Harmon Olmsted and Rebecca Durenleau during the weeks after the murder.
And then lay them one at a time.
The first brick the prosecution placed was the life insurance policy Rebecca took out on Michael just before his death.
Did there come a time in the spring of 1985 when increased life insurance coverage was taken out on the life of Michael Durenleau?
Yes, there was.
And who was the beneficiary of the life insurance on Michael's life?
I believe his wife was.
She benefited from Michael's death with a $90,000 life insurance payment, which, back in 1985 was real money.
The next brick in the prosecution's wall was provided by Rebecca Durenleau's own mother.
You state the name, please.
Teresa Dumont.
The mom was a helpful witness to us, even though she probably wanted to believe that her daughter really wasn't involved.
What did Rebecca say happened in November of '84 between her husband and Harmon Olmsted?
She and Michael went into the outpost, and Harmon followed them in. And Michael told Harmon to leave his wife alone.
And what did Harmon, according to Becky, what did Harmon say to Michael?
He said, make sure you got eyes behind your head.
What else did Rebecca relate that Harmon said to Michael at the outpost in November of '84?
Harmon said to him, I'll get you sooner or later. And he walked out.
The next circumstantial brick in the case against Rebecca was the testimony of a friend she confided in a few years after Michael was murdered.
We needed her testimony. I don't think, absent her testimony, I'm not sure I would have brought the case.
No, the jury, please. Rebecca's conviction when she came into your house last time.
She'd been drinking.
How would you tell that she'd been drinking?
There was a very strong odor. Alcohol.
Becky may have been intoxicated or had been drinking at the time, but, people sometimes tend to be more truthful when they're intoxicated.
Who brought up the subject of Michael Durenleau?
She did.
And how was it that that subject came up?
She asked me if I was aware of her having an affair with Harmon Olmsted before Michael had been killed.
And what did you say to her?
I said no.
What was her response when you told her that no, you weren't aware of that?
No, she didn't. She couldn't believe I did not know.
Did she then proceed to talk about the affair?
Yes.
What did she say to you?
She told me that she had been seeing him and that she had told him that she was going to start sleeping with Michael again and that he was going to have to prove himself.
Did she go on to relate a later conversation that she had with Harmon Olmsted?
So she got a phone call from him.
When did she say she'd gotten that phone call?
After he was dead.
And what did she say went on during that conversation?
She told me that he had stated to her that he had proven himself.
I thought that was dynamic evidence because it was both evidence about before the murder, you need to prove yourself, and then after the murder, Harmon said, I proved myself. And clearly in the context of the case, proving himself was dispatching of Michael. So I thought it was hugely important evidence.
But one of the most important pieces of the prosecution's case was the testimony of John Powell.
So almost for the evidence you're about to give relative to the cause and under consideration should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You got it.
I do.
See the truth.
John Powell owned Flanders Hardware, which was a store right near Veronica's Tavern. And he, I thought, was one of the key witnesses.
Powell says he noticed a pickup truck near his lumber yard around 9:45 p.m. on the night of the murder.
So I became increasingly suspicious as to, first of all, what it was doing there. Second of all, I became suspicious that it was probably coming after some of our material.
After several minutes, Powell said a man left the truck and walked towards the railroad yard behind Veronica's Tavern.
Its size, I remember right now because as I was on a fairly flat area and looking across, I realized this individual was just about my height, 6 feet. And it dawned on me that perhaps the person I was trying to come up on in the yard was smaller than me.
So a little self-protection in that outfit.
That's one of the reasons I remember that.
And the pickup truck that Powell described, with its distinctive running lights, matched the make and model of a pickup truck belonging to none other than Harmon Olmsted.
It did put someone tall near a pickup truck that resembled Harmon's pickup truck in a location very close to where the murder took place.
When we return, Harmon Olmsted takes the stand and the defense fights back.
I hate to say people gasped when his name was called, but it was like, oh, baby, here we go. This is the big one.
A former ballerina charged in the death of her husband.
Said that she attacked her and she shot him.
She's claiming that he is the aggressor in all of this.
I see a liar. I see a manipulator. She killed my dad.
Will the jury see her actions as self-defense?
Boy, did she have every reason to fear him.
Or murder.
The Black Swan Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
After building their case against Rebecca Durenleau brick by circumstantial brick, the prosecution called on the man at the center of it all, Harmon Olmsted, the alleged lover of Rebecca Durenleau and suspected murderer of Michael Durenleau. While it was unclear whether he actually would testify, his very presence sent ripples of anticipation through that courtroom.
I hate to say people gasped when his name was called, but it was like, here we go. This is the big one. Everybody was sort of, if you will, on the edge of their seat, waiting to see what Harmon Olmsted was going to say about Michael Durenleau, about Becky, about what happened that night.
Please state your name.
Harmon Robert Olmsted.
You speak up, please.
Harmon Robert Olmsted.
Mr. Olmsted, did you play any part whatsoever in the murder of Michael Durenleau, which murder took place on July the 12th of 1985?
You know, it did sort of fizzle, though, when he took the Fifth Amendment.
I respectfully decline to answer the reliance on the rights given to me by the U.S. and Vermont Constitution at this time.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
He did what we expected he would do and let the jury infer from that whatever it wished.
You're excused, Mr. Olmsted. Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I just might state that...
My guess is the jury didn't infer, well, that guy's innocent as can be. He just doesn't want to answer questions.
If you're so innocent, how come you don't proclaim your innocence? And to me, by taking the Fifth, doesn't make you look very good.
With the prosecution resting their case, it was finally the defense's turn. And defense lawyer Peter Langrock had a lot to say.
I wish I knew. I wish I'd been on this case, and I wish I could point to the evidence.
which would say, in what way did she assist? And what proof there is of that. I thought that it was a ridiculous investigation. They were coming to a conclusion that she was involved on the flimsiest of theories. There's lots of innuendo and lots of proof of potential motive. Yes, there was an affair going on. Yes, there have been some fights. That's a long way, ladies and gentlemen, for first-degree murder. I talked to her, and it just didn't seem to me there was any possibility that she could be involved, and she certainly wasn't involved in the killing itself, and the idea of her being accessory before the fact just was off the table. I love to cross-examine, and I want you to see by cross-examination some of the discrepancies, outrageous discrepancies in the state's case. There is no tool that gets the truth better than cross-examination.
One of Langrock's most effective cross-examinations was of the insurance agent whose testimony the prosecution used to insinuate Rebecca had suspiciously purchased a life insurance policy for Michael.
Did you discuss with Mike Durenleau the taking out of this additional coverage?
Yes, I did.
And was that because he wanted to cover his mortgage?
Yeah, I believe it was. They needed extra protection at the time, and I recommended that was a good time to add a booster on.
And did he indicate that he was in a position now where he could afford that extra premium?
Yes.
I take it one of the great advantages of being a salesman, you sell an initial policy and then you try to update it as time goes on.
Yes. If you're going to be a good agent, this is where you try and keep track of your clients.
And that's exactly what happened in this case.
Yes.
Not clear.
Langrock's cross-examination revealed that the insurance agent had suggested the additional coverage and that Michael was fully aware and approved of it.
A proper cross-examination of a witness like this can turn that witness from being a witness positive for the state to a witness that's positive for you, and I think we accomplished most of that with regard to the insurance agent.
The defense also seized upon the mysterious disappearance of the original police files.
Did a time come when you received a call from the Essex Police Department that they're filing the Durenleau homicide case come up missing?
Yes.
And as a result of that search, did you make a search for your file in this case?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result of that search?
That file also was missing.
Was this file never logged out?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
Sir, is there any way that this file could reasonably have been misplaced?
No.
That your opinion, sir, that somebody had to take that file without authorization?
It's true.
We were in a situation of having no hard evidence that we could put our hands on to speak of. And so that the state had enough innuendo, but we had nothing to cross-examine it on. And it was one of the difficulties of the case.
In his closing arguments, Langrock attacked the prosecution for failing to produce any physical evidence placing Harmon at the crime scene.
There is not a single piece, I think this correct quote from a single piece of scientific evidence that places Harmon Olmsted at the scene of this crime. Not a single piece.
And for lacking tangible proof of a conspiracy between Rebecca and Harmon to murder Michael.
If you start saying, what is the proof that says Rebecca did anything? If you start saying, like the Asian, where is the evidence? I think you'll find it lacking.
Peter Langrock, in his closing, just tried to find any and all little holes that he could poke. I thought Bill Sorrell had an excellent closing argument.
Look at all of this evidence. Prove yourself. You better have eyes behind your head. I'm gonna get you.
I mean, he painted this picture, if you will, piece by piece by piece by piece.
This parking, 200 feet behind this bar. At this bar, 50 miles from our home.
And just gave a trail of information jurors could easily see.
You consider all that evidence, and collectively you talk about what this witness said, and that witness said, piece it together. The evidence establishes that Hiram Olmsted did get Michael Durenleau. That Michael Durenleau should have had eyes behind his head. That Harmon Olmsted took care of it. And Becky was in it up to her ears. Becky Durenleau is guilty as charged.
When we return, the moment of truth arrives as the jury delivers the verdict and the reaction no one saw coming.
You will see the evidence, you will hear the arguments, and ultimately you will hear the verdict.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan, weeknights at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
During the trial of Rebecca Durenleau for being an accessory to the murder of her husband, Michael, the prosecution had worked hard to build a wall of circumstantial evidence, while the defense had worked just as tirelessly to create cracks in that foundation. Now, the moment of truth.
Very, very hard. Waiting for the verdict. Didn't know which way it was going to go.
They didn't have to wait long. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict.
Then when we finally get the call that the verdict was coming in, and then we all met down at the courthouse.
All rise, please. Morning, have a seat.
No time in my life do I ever go through the physical experience I have when the jury works back out. I can actually hear my heart in my ears.
Well, the first thing I always did when a jury was coming back is look at the jurors and see whether any of them made eye contact with me. And if they didn't, then that would get me starting to feel a little nervous.
Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, we have.
All right. On the charge that Rebecca Durenleau did aid in the first-degree murder of Michael Durenleau on July 12, 1985, does the jury find her guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Is that the verdict of all of you?
Yes.
There is sort of an outcry from both sides.
I'm going to wait just a
crying
minute.
and gnashing of teeth, and I think there's crying of joy tears from the Durenleau family. The judge orders the jurors polled.
Simply guilty or not guilty?
And one by one, they each say guilty.
1. Guilty. 2.
Guilty.
And he gets to about the 7th or 8th one, and Rebecca flops over. She hits the floor, and unclear what it was, but the judge keeps right on going.
Guilty.
9.
She's on the floor.
To all phases.
Eventually she gets back up.
And your willingness to
She gets in the chair.
bear up with the delays.
And they talk a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then she goes down again. And this time they call the rescue squad. They eventually put her on a gurney, take her outside to waiting ambulance, then off to the hospital where she's treated by the staff.
Outside the courthouse, Michael's sister Rachel spoke to a Court TV reporter.
It's a verdict of guilty. What can you tell me about what you're thinking right now?
I'm very happy. It's been a long 7 years, and to hear the jurors come back with a guilty verdict made them 7 years worth waiting for.
We were happy. We were happy. We thought, well, it's finally come to an end. This is good. You know, we can move on. Not that you ever forget, but it was kind of giving us some closure.
Yeah. So was some rosemary.
This was such a relief to them and a pleasant one, and warmed my heart that they were as happy and appreciative as they were, and that I'd played some part in getting to this point.
Bill Sorrell took an understandable victory lap after winning a murder conviction in a cold case that his predecessors had not dared to touch, given the almost complete lack of physical evidence.
Now, you're off to Montpelier now. This is your last case.
This is my last case. I'm done. I turned in my blue light today and my police radio, and I'm going to be dealing in the world of finance and politics.
Well, what would your advice be to your succeeding state's attorney regarding what to do about Harmon Olmsted?
I'll have advice for him, but him or her, but I'm not going to give the advice publicly.
It's hard.
Not surprisingly, Rebecca's defense lawyer wasn't so happy.
And I think really it's a miscarriage of justice, but I think the appeals court and perhaps the motion for mistrial, which is still pending, having been remade, will straighten it out.
I was convinced that she didn't do it. I was convinced the state hadn't proven it, and I was embarrassed that the system had failed.
Coming up, Rebecca Durenleau speaks, and her lawyer pleads her case before the highest court in the state. With Rebecca Durenleau sentenced to 35 years in prison, Michael's family finally felt that justice had been served. But as the defense vowed to fight the verdict all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court, they were about to see if the hard-won verdict would stand up under the scrutiny of the state's highest court.
The state says Olmsted, after being convicted of helping to murder her husband, Rebecca Durenleau was brought here for sentencing. When offered a shorter prison term if she would testify against Harmon Olmsted, her answer was clear.
I've gone through this for over 7 years, and I will still prove my innocence to the day I die.
But last year, once the media frenzy subsided, a Court TV reporter visited Rebecca Durenleau in prison.
One of our bigger cases. Do you think that justice had been done in this case? And if not, why not?
They felt, convicting me, that justice was done. But I don't feel justice is done because the person or persons that's walking out there that did this is still walking free.
What, if anything, would you have to say to the family of Michael Durenleau?
I would have a lot to say to them. Something you wouldn't want to publish.
Well, yes, if you can tell us in a way that's...
I feel when it's all done with and over with, and I walk out these doors, they'll know that's the answer.
It was an optimistic sentiment echoed by her attorney.
I definitely felt that the grounds for appeal were very solid. There's something just wrong about a woman being convicted of first-degree murder for getting somebody else to do it, and they're not having evidence that the other person did it.
The Vermont Supreme Court ultimately agreed to review Rebecca's case. News of the appeal made Michael's family uneasy.
I got a call saying that they were going to appeal it, which I kind of figured that was going to happen anyway. It was like, oh no, you know, what's going on? Are they going to win on this? So it made you nervous. It made you wonder what was going to happen because you didn't know.
In May of 1994, the Vermont Supreme Court heard Rebecca Durenleau's appeal, with Peter Langrock arguing her case before the justices.
I've asked myself 1,000 times, based upon the evidence in this case, how did the jury come to this conclusion? I think the conclusion is that my client was an adulterer, was carrying on an affair, and that she was a person who probably told a series of inconsistent statements, and that she was just not worthy.
This was an intense argument. There was so much at stake. And as I recall, the court was questioning, the court was concerned, the court knew the facts, and they asked tough questions, and I was able to answer them, at least I thought I was at the time, and I felt good about the argument.
When we return, the Vermont Supreme Court's shocking decision.
Court TV.
The prosecutor insisted its case against Rebecca Durenleau was built brick by brick on solid circumstantial evidence, while the defense called it all an unstable house of cards. Now, the very foundations of Rebecca's murder conviction were being tested by the Vermont Supreme Court. As always, Michael's family was there.
I attended every hearing. Everything that ever happened, I was there.
One recurring question from the justices made Rebecca fear their newfound sense of closure might be short-lived.
If the prosecution, in order to obtain a conviction in this case, had to prove that Mr. Olmsted, beyond a reasonable doubt, murdered the husband, why is it that he has never been charged?
We were upset that this was going to be happening. And, you know, when that happens, you never know which way it's going to go. So, yeah, kind of put you on pins and needles and kept hoping that this appeal wasn't going to work out.
And this time, Sorrell wasn't there to argue for the prosecution.
At that time, I didn't know that one of the associate justices said, "Why didn't you charge Harmon Olmsted?" I mean, I wish I had been arguing the case, because I would have responded pretty clearly to that.
On September 30th, 1994, the Vermont Supreme Court announced its decision.
That Friday morning, they get a call from the Supreme Court. And this is from the Supreme Court. The court handed down the decision today, and the entry is, we enter a judgment of acquittal. Just read that back again. Read back and yeah! The joyous shout was heard throughout the office. What the hell's going on? We got an acquittal! We got an acquittal! I called up Becky and said, "Becky, I got good news for you." I said, the Supreme Court not only reversed the case, but they ended acquittal. You're done, you're getting out, and you're getting out today.
Then I get a call, I think, from a reporter saying, "What do you think of the fact that Becky Durenleau's been, the Supreme Court reversed and she's being released from prison today?" I was shocked. I thought we put in a strong case, and I think the jury and the trial judge responded to the evidence that we put in, and the Supreme Court has its role, and I'm respectful of that, but surprised and disappointed.
Michael Durenleau's loved ones were left stunned by the acquittal, a decision that seemed to mock their years of grief and search for closure.
It was like, you know, we went through this all these years, and then you go to the trial, and then it's like 2 years later, and it's like, okay, now it's over with. We're right back to square one. Very disappointing. Very.
It's been almost 40 years since their brother was murdered in cold blood behind Veronica's Tavern, but Michael's siblings still gather here religiously to keep his memory and their hope for justice alive. One reason Michael's family agreed to speak with Court TV was the hope, however small, that someone out there knows what really happened that night and will reach out so the family can at least have closure.